Oh.
People warned us. Yeah, we appreciate your support.
Sounds like it was good.
It's such a big country. That's what surprised me. I didn't realize it was that.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
I started it.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody. Today, our topic today is Glory Hallelujah, churches, mosques, and holy places in early Shakopee. And we kind of added, we always play around with this stuff, so that's why we added the mosque, because that's been happening, although it's a little later, but still, and the holy places too. Okay. And of course, whenever we talk, we are the Shakopee Heritage Society, but we always want to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional land of the Dakota people. So we honor with gratitude the land itself, the people who have stewarded it through the generations, including the Ojibwa and other indigenous nations. They were here first, and they're still there now. Okay. So one of the first things I was thinking about is the burial grounds here in Shakopee is really important, and it's really an interesting thing. In other words, this is that Memorial Park area. It's really beyond that. And I remember because when I was a kid, this is me, it was a memorial thing, and they gave me a citizen ward or something. Weird. I just remember this is of course think that I had my stroke, right? So I say that's my reason why I can't remember anything. But I just don't think I can remember things anyway. But I remember I was a kid. All right, and they did this thing, and I got this little award. Okay, it was in the newspaper, so that's what I remember when I saw it. But what I remember about specifically, it was on a mound, and there's the flag there. And that's where they actually had the service. Until you really, I remember when I was there, I was on this mound going up there and thinking, I'm standing in somebody's graves. Am I supposed to be doing this? But obviously that's what it was said. They eventually realized that, and moved this thing and everything. But it's just kind of why when we think about that so often. The area is beautiful, Memorial Park, and it's turning into almost basically a cemetery there for the Dakota and others who were here first. They said in Shakopee, more than 12,000 mounds have been documented in Minnesota. More than that were probably lost. And most of them were on the rivers or lakes. Most of them were in Scott County, and they're between 2,500 to 600 years ago.
Wow.
And there's actually a thing that actually shows, this was I think from I want to say 1911, but it might have been before then. Yeah, you got that? Is that better? Might do another one too, probably. But it's interesting, they actually shows, like this is the tightest edition, okay, and they actually show the mounds that were here. If you look at downtown Shakopee and you look at where Ruby Tuesdays is now, okay, that used to be a mound. And right next to it, which was the hotel, there was a mound there.
So
there are mounds all along the whole river. At one point, people basically just used them for houses and stuff like that. So you didn't have, but then some still have some that are still around.
So when they built Ruby Tuesdays and all that out there, did they dig all those up?
They just covered it up. I mean, filled it. Yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah. But that's all over the place. That was all over the Minnesota. That they use it for crops and stuff like that. So they just plowed it over basically.
different when I eat.
So now they're finally, now as they're realizing, they're thinking more, so they're doing things that these are sacred mounds, and there's actually, these are some of the signs that are going up there now that basically says, leave it alone and don't stand on the mounds also, okay? And of course, you know, you've seen the goats that are here in the fall, and that's how they clean it, because the mounds has some kind of plants here that grow all over the place that really shouldn't even be there at all. But they're there all the time, so they have to go through, and the goats will go and eat them.
I love that.
And that's a smart way to do it, a nice way to do it, kind of. I kind of like the idea, so.
I wonder if the goats ever wander away.
Some of the grounds were before the Dakota were here. Some have been our actual Dakota graves are there also. So here's where it's in the winter time. That's a nice picture, by the way. I did that. I just love a nice picture. Here's what this mounds say now, but they're doing the ones that we just said before is coming there. But it's just so you know that they're there. It's a nice thing to just remember as a thing to remember. The next thing that we talk about a lot is this Sioux mission of St. Francis Xavier from 1843 to 1844. This is the actual first white-related church in Shakopee.
And where?
Nobody ever talks about it. I'll tell you.
Where is it?
I'll tell you in a minute.
I
All
want
right.
to know too.
Okay, so here's what happened, okay? It moved. It used to be in Carver, the chapel. When they decided that Tinta-Otanwa, which is a village of 600 Dakota that lived, it was now Memorial Park, right? It was on the north side and then the south side of the river, okay? And this person shows up, okay?
Oh.
He was born in France. He was 7 seminarians who recruited to America. I know that they almost drowned in the Mississippi River on a trip to Dubuque, okay? And also died because of thirst. But he was ordained in Dubuque in 1840. So once he was there, he came up the part that was Minnesota Territory area and the Dakota Territory to see the mission for the Indians. They're traveling around the river St. Pierre or St. Peter's River, which of course is the Minnesota River, okay? They found Catholic families in Mendota, which at that time was the Iowa Territory, and across the valley at Fort Snelling, which at that time was the Wisconsin Territory. You know, they changed so many, it's hard to remember which is which, but okay. So here you see where we're looking at. So there's our village, which is Tinta-Otanwa, and then the Little Rapids area is where the first church ended up being built. It's called the Village of the Barrier Stone, or Little Rapids, or Carver Rapids, are all names that people use when they talk about this place. Okay. It was a fur post just south of what is now Carver, along the Minnesota River. John Baptist Faribault arrived in 1803. He met his wife there. Then they moved to a different place. They returned again in the 1830s They operated the post with the help of their sons, Alexander, David, and Oliver. So there's John Baptiste Faribault. Then there's David, Oliver, and Alexander. He ended up starting Faribault in Minnesota, right? Oliver was the one who was starting here in Shakopee. Okay. David ended up, when he died, he took over here in Shakopee area. But at that point, they were at the Prairie area, which from 1842 to 1843. He was there so this priest was there, right? And while he was there, he learned the Dakota language from David, Oliver, and Alexander. He said that learning Dakota was much harder than learning Latin and Greek. So obviously that's why I can't speak. I also am not very good in Latin or Greek.
Very good in English.
All I ever did was 2 years of Spanish in the high school, and it was like so bad because this is way back. And the teacher, I don't think he could speak Spanish himself. I just know, I don't really remember anything that I learned. However, except, hola.
Yeah.
And a few things like that, right? But it's interesting because now my nieces and nephews who've been to schools here in Shakopee, 3 or 4 of them have ended up living in other countries speaking just Spanish.
Wow.
They've gotten jobs because they're able to speak English and Spanish. I mean,
Yeah.
they're good at what they're doing in the high school here now. All right, but anyway, Oliver was back in Little Prairie. Our father, Augusta, said, a few days later, I was induced by the Faribault families, but most especially by the old respectable gentleman, John Baptiste Faribault, to spend the winter with him and 2 of his sons, Oliver and David, both married in Little Prairie. He had been a trading post there for the Indians of Shakopee and also for the Sioux of other village in Carver, Little Rack. So this is his letter. And he said, he really liked being with them because they loved the Indians and was very immersed in the successful of their mission. Now you have to understand that Oliver and David both were 1/4 Dakota Indian themselves, okay, because of their mother, okay. They spoke equally well in French, English, and Sioux language, in other words, Dakota. They were good interpreters and very useful to me to translate my book into the Sioux language. And so he does. He wrote this book, The Path to the House of God, and it was translated from the French to Dakota by Alexander, Oliver, and David Faribault. So John Baptiste Faribault said, you need to establish a permanent Roman Catholic mission there. So they built a small log cabin near the Faribault compound in Little Prairie. This picture is not of it. That's just another picture, so just so you know. So it was constructed in 1843. It was operated until 1844. And then at that point in 1844, Oliver married Wankin Yonkinwin, okay? And so when they did that, they moved, Wankin Yonkinwin was both spoke Dakota and French, a little bit of English. And they moved to Tinta Ottawa, which people called the Prairie de France, which is now what we call Shakopee. Okay?
Well, you're good at those
You can tell I can speak no languages very well. But anyway, they said the chapel was about 15 by 30 feet. They said it was a log construction. It was probably built in the style of with hew logs laid horizontal. Okay. And of course, they moved here because that's Shakopee #2, and that's where the name of the Shakopee is named after. And then his son was Shakopee 3, or Little 6. So if you look at the statues, downtown, that statue, you know, of
Yeah.
that's #3.
Oh,
That one, just so you
two
know.
looks grouchy.
Well, he was a little bit.
So there's three.
He's involved in the U.S. Dakota War too. Okay, so when they moved to the French Prairie, then father decided to move the chapel there. Where was it located? Probably near Faribault Trading Post, near the springs, later called Faribault Springs. You know where that's located? Mm-hmm. Okay, you know where the Shakopee house is?
Yeah.
This is the place where you eat, right? Across the street is where the Faribault Trading Post was.
Oh,
Okay, and then right next to that is the little water area there that goes water year-round, okay? That's the Faribault Springs. So we're guessing it's somewhere in this area, it's probably over where the Shakopee house area, probably, okay? So when this happened, when they decided to move the thing, they moved it here, and then some Dakota threatened to burn the chapel within the year if they keep it there. So as a result, the chapel was sold to the German Catholics in Wabasha, spelled like that, in 1844. So they sold it, they moved it down the river, and it's there, but it's not there now, okay? And of course, the father left in the spring of 1844, never to return. But that really technically is the first other chapel that was here in Shakopee. Learn something new there, right?
yeah.
You don't find much information about this, but it is, you find during things you're like, oh, this is so interesting, but anyway. They know it was placed on a raft, floated on the river, set up on Main Street in Wabasha. Later it was changed to Wabasha with no W at the end, okay? It was used but not regularly. Eventually it was closed. Then it was used as a newspaper publishing place and a schooling. And now nothing's there. So we have no real truth of all of this, but that's what we know. The next thing that we talk about is the Pond Mission from 1847 to 1853. In the Shakopee County Argus, it says, for 6 years, starting in 1847, the Indians had gathered in varying numbers each Sabbath to learn the white man's religion, and the little children had gathered each day for religious instruction. The number, how many people actually attended, it wasn't very large. And we know that at one point, one of the person removed some of the children who were attending church and the school. And Reverend Samuel Pond, and if you know downtown Shakopee on Lewis and First Avenue, of course, is a statue of Samuel Pond. Okay. He said, I had great hope that I had seen many of these Indians converted.
I can't hear
But
you.
faithful missionaries in different parts of the world have spent their lives without seeing any fruits of their labor. What am I better than they? So in other words, he's saying it didn't really go all that well. But it was a start for that. Here's the springs here in Shakopee.
Oh, that's great.
That's just a nice picture of it. There's actually three different places where the water comes in from that. 600 Dakota lived in Tintotonwa, and the spring water was known for its purity. In fact, there's an article one time where, in I think the 1940s, someone was trying to use that water and make bottled water,
Yeah.
and they were like, no, it's not yours, not your water. Okay. They come down and go head all the way out to the river there. So you can see it now, or often when you're there. There's some of the Faribault families there with the water right there. Oops. Yeah, there were 3 springs that fed into the water. It kept at a constant temperature. They often used for the place for the birth of Dakota children. Winter in the springs.
Now, where exactly is that located?
Location is, you know where the signs are for the Shakopee History Park?
Yeah, yeah.
As you head down there, right there, you'll see
Is it on the south side of,
Yes,
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Isn't it Shakopee Ford and then a house and then the springs?
yeah.
That's-
The house is not there
Oh,
anymore,
okay.
although it is in the landing.
Was.
Okay.
And the pond house is not there anymore, but the foundation is still
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
Patricia Arnold Cates, this is in 2016, she's 84 years old. She's still alive. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Oliver and Monken Yankenlin. And she remembers growing up in the Faribault cabin, which was there, and the trading post East Shakopee on First Avenue. And it was built in 1844. Some people say they think there's like a, not a tunnel, but a cave, and that's where they use a lot for when people would trade there. But I don't know if that's true or not. But she remembers trudging down the path to Faribault Springs with her brother, each day with 2 buckets to fill. Then they would go back up the hill for the day. There was no water and no electricity there. It was kind of interesting. And then eventually they built another house right next to that when she was a sophomore in high school in 1949. And that had water and electricity, which is pretty important. I'm sure she was happy.
Yeah.
All right, the next thing that we think about a lot are places is St. Peter's Episcopal Church from 1854 to 1921. There's a picture, all right? A person, Reverend, was from Stillwater, arrived here to Shakopee, Minnesota Territory, and his wife built a shanty in the spring of 1854. He said, it seemed like going into the wilderness when I came here, but it appeared to me they ought to have at least one missionary in the valley of the Minnesota. And that's actually what it looked like inside. This is in 1880. It's not the best picture, but it shows what it looked like. I think a better picture, yeah.
Do we know where that church was?
Yes, I hope this will tell me. There you go. Oh, wait, let me think. No, I'm trying to think. It doesn't say exactly where. It would be, what was the place that they called? We'd always go by and they'd have this apartments kind of thing. Like Lewis and Third Avenue, I think. I have to see for sure, but I know it was late in 1854. Daniel Storer built it. Then the Reverend left. He didn't stay very long. That didn't help. Okay. So for up till 1921, it was still there with a minister and a few services. And soon it was torn down and the organized disappeared.
That wasn't on Third and
Third-
Holmes, was it?
I want to say Home, but I want to say Lewis, but maybe it could be Holmes Street.
Okay, so I lived in the K house and that was there.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to think of that.
But that
It's right
was there
close to
since
that.
1880, that house was built, so I don't know which corner that would be on.
It was on that, okay, where that was,
Library?
Library?
the street, in other words, where the library is, right to the right and then on the left side. So here's
Where the K house is here.
K is here on the street, on, what street is that, Lewis?
Lewis?
Okay, this was the K house, and then this is the street, Third Street,
Oh.
and it was right along here.
So next to the K house.
Yeah,
Oh,
Totally
interesting.
gone. Is the K
it's
house
gone.
Some historic place to it.
No, it's not, it's an
K
apartment.
house? You call it the K house?
Yeah, the K house.
Right.
I remember that walking all the time, but I don't know. That's-
Kitty corner from library.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Up
It's
there,
still
that's
there.
Big balconies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I lived there for,
Oh,
it's a weird,
Quite a few
it's
years.
a weird place, but I just remember. Okay, First Presbyterian Church, 1853. This is on 502 First Avenue East. They call this area, remember there are 8 names for Shakopee. For a while it was called Prairieville,
oh,
which is basically Tinta Otanwa translated into English. The first preaching service to white settlers in Shakopee occurred in the old mission house in the month of June 1853. Before the church was built, the house actually was the mission house, which is by Memorial Park there on the south side. Then it was in the law office. Then it was the upper floor of Holmes Hall. It was in private homes. It was in barns, okay? So it was just moving around before they finally had a place. At one point, they said Thomas Holmes' store and others gave a dance at Holmes Hall for the benefit for the church fund, and they handed it to the pastor for the good of the church. Okay. He said, I find recollection of the first service of the old church, then a miracle of newness and beauty in my eyes. It is true that the seats were rough boards on a carpenter's horses, and the pulpit and gallery had not yet been supplied, but it was the new church, and it had a tower and a bell. The first church, the second in the valley, was built in the fall of 1856. It was a frame building, okay, on 2nd Street and Market Street location. It was used for about 180 people. They later added fences and horse sheds between Main and Market Street. Then in 1899, they built the new church, which was on 1st Street and Fillmore Street. Okay?
yeah,
Okay?
It's
It
still there.
was there. 1900 is when they dedicated it. The bell was from the 1856 church. There were two stained glass windows dedicated. One was of Samuel Pond, and the other was of his wife, Cordelia Eggleston Pond. I sure wish we had a picture of that or information about that, but I don't know. is not there now, put it that way. So that's the church. It stayed there as a church from 1900 to 1967. It was on there for 30 years. Then it was used as a bus terminal, an office building, and then in 1987 it became what we call Mexican church.
Yeah.
Isn't that sad? That's how we remember it, okay.
That's easier.
Okay. And there it is there, okay. So you see that now. So that's the same church that was way back was the Presbyterian
Wow.
church.
Never knew that.
They call it the Church of the Living God, okay. The usual,
Can you go back by one?
go back one?
There's a, Dan mentioned there's some silver,
Do they own the house next door?
oh, what about the?
I'm not sure about that. I think so.
Yeah.